I want to welcome you to the first guest speaker for the ParaMOOC course. We started on January 18th, and we're going through February 20th with the live classes and then monthly discussion forums from March until August. And as you know, this MOOC is being supported by Lisa Coley, the president of the Parapsychology Foundation, and is organized and put together by Carlos and I in our teaching project called The Azire. And I wanted to make a shout out as well to the young lady on 123rf.com, Radiant Skies, could be a guy too, I don't know, who made this really nice logo that we purchased for our courses. I'd also like to remind you that next up is, tomorrow is a free day. Thursday will be our discussion forums on WizIQ and in Second Life. And on Saturday, we will have Dr. Bill Everest from Tucson, Arizona, talking about the spiritual transformative experiences of new mediums. And today, let me move over so that I can introduce. Today we have Dr. Antonia Mills from the University of Northern British Columbia. She will be giving a talk today called Research on Children Who Remember a Previous Life. And Antonia Mills was introduced in reincarnation by the Beaver Indians of Canada while doing field research for her PhD at Harvard University, and therefore introduced to Ian Stevenson, the psychiatrist who pioneered the scientific study of cases of the reincarnation type. Asked by him to document cases among British Columbia Indians and in India, and then hired by Stevenson to continue this research at the University of Virginia for 6 years. Mills has published many papers on reincarnation in Canada and in India, co-edited Amerindian Rebirth, Reincarnation Belief Among North American Indians and Inuit, and is writing That's My Chair, Rebirth Experience Among the, I hope I say this right, the Gitxsan and the Witsuwit'en. Also, she has written the chapter on reincarnation with her colleague, Dr. Jim Tucker from the University of Virginia, in Edsel Cardania's Parapsychology, a Handbook for the 21st Century, and it's a marvelous chapter.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate the intro that you gave. So we'll go on to my PowerPoint. We know that people have, or we can imagine that people have experienced children talking about an apparent past life for a very long time, millennia. We are aware that Indigenous people on most continents, such as Africa, Australia, and even the previous people in Europe, certainly in North America, and we have less information about South America, but we know that they have belief in reincarnation, and children have doubtless spoken about those lives for a very long time. And then in Hindu and the Buddhist peoples have many more examples for a long time too, of course. But we're wanting to look at the studies that the psychiatrist Ian Stevenson began, and that did the systematic scientific study of children said to remember previous lives. Ian Stevenson became chair of psychiatry at the University of Virginia, and after being there, and he became chair of psychiatry at the University of Virginia at the age of 39. At that point, he hadn't published anything on reincarnation, but he was such a fine scholar that at that early age he was invited and became the chair of psychiatry at UVA. And then he went on to become the pioneer of reincarnation studies. There should be an R here, documenting what he called cases of the reincarnation type, or CORT. CORT stands for cases of the reincarnation type. He used that term, cases of the reincarnation type, because he wanted to show that he was doing a scientific study and let people decide if it was reincarnation, that was being manifest in the numerous cases that he began studying. And he founded the Division of Personality Studies. First of all, it was called, the DOPS was the Division of Parapsychology at UVA. But he found that parapsychology was a term that many MD, psychiatrists, doctors didn't take very seriously. And so then he renamed it the Division of Personality Studies, so still has the DOPS thing. And it's actually now called the Division of Perceptual Studies, so it's still DOPS. But he founded it in 1967. He received a gift from Chester Carlson for $1 million. Chester Carlson was the inventor of the Xerox machine, and it's kind of interesting that Xerox machines make copies, and reincarnation is kind of like a copy too. So having received that generous gift from Chester Carlson, Ian Stevenson, was able to have somebody else become the chair of psychiatry and devote his time to doing a very careful scientific study of reincarnation cases all around the world. He began first, his studies began with the Haida and the Tlingit up in northwestern, Canada and Alaska, and the Inuit, as well in that area, and documenting their cases. Then he moved his studies on to Turkey and Ceylon and India and Sri Lanka right down here, and Lebanon back here, and produced many significant articles. Then he published his first 5 major volumes on court. And the first one that he published was 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation in 1966, and he revised it later 2 other times, but it's a fascinating book that describes cases in India, in Ceylon, in Brazil, among the Tlingit, and in Lebanon. So that was his first volume, and that he wrote, or the first book that he wrote, and then he published these 4 sets of volumes. In 1975, 10 cases in India. Then in 1977, 10 cases in Sri Lanka. It's volume 2. Volume 3 was 12 cases in Lebanon and Turkey. The Druze of Lebanon and the Levi of Turkey are now peoples who also consider themselves Muslim, but they experienced and report reincarnation cases quite frequently, and so he documented them very carefully. Volume 4 was 12 cases in Thailand and Burma, which came out in 1983. And the articles that he wrote, and he wrote lots of articles as well, of course, and his books present very careful and systematic study of the cases. He did a really, scientific study of them, describing what the child said and did at what age, noting who witnessed it, and checking to see if the statements, the behavior, and the recognitions were correct for what he called the previous personality, the person that the child said that was saying they were. So that's the PP stands for personality, previous personality. In solved cases, through very careful work with the family of the PP family as well. This was creating a very systematic and thorough study of these court cases. The articles and his first 5 volumes had already laid out the features of court cases, and they are early onset of statements, behavior, and recognitions made by the child. The average age for a child speaking about a previous life is 30 months, and that's less than 3 years. And sometimes pre-verbal children give indications as well. That he also found that there was a high frequency of violent or premature death of the previous person. It seems that in those circumstances there's a greater desire to come back quickly. He also noted that there were phobias or fears and philias or likes related to the previous life, and that children stopped speaking about these experiences, stopped experiencing them so much by the age of 6 and thereafter. But we'll go back to B. He noted many birthmarks related to the cause of death in the previous life on the child. We'll return to these topics later. Already in 1983, Stevenson and his associates compared the features of 867 court cases cross-culturally, noting that there is variation depending on the culture in whether the case was solved or unsolved and how frequently that happened. The cause of death, natural and unnatural, and seeing to what extent it happened in the different cultures. The interval between the PP death, the previous person dying, and the child's birth, and whether the previous personality's family was known to the child's family, and sometimes there are same family cases in which it is known, and sometimes the child would speak about someone that their parents had heard of or knew but was not related to, and there are a number of cases where a child would talk about being someone that the parents had never heard of, didn't know existed. This article in 1983 was written by Cook, who was one of the associates. Emily Williams Cook was still is a research assistant at the professor at the Division of Perceptual Studies now, who did her PhD studying cases of Lebanon, of reincarnation in Lebanon, and she is still very active. She has produced this book, Science, the Self, and Survival After Death, much more recently. Her name is now Emily Williams Kelly, and still, is very, very active in this field. The Satwant Pasricha, one of the co-authors, is a psychologist in India who served as a translator for Ian for many of his studies. Originally, there were people of another generation, older, who were served as Ian's translators there, psychologists in India who were very interested in the study of reincarnation. Satwant Pasricha has done her own studies, including a book on cases in India as well. Samararatne was someone who found and studied cases and acted as translator for Ian in Sri Lanka, and Win Mong served as Ian's translator in Burma, and Ian Stevenson, of course, also took part in this whole study. And it's a comparison of features of solved and unsolved cases. Very, very, very interesting article. And note that if you go to, if you Google DOPS UVA, you'll come up with their website, and in the website they list the books and the articles, and you can find a book like this one as a PDF, so you can open up and you'll find and read these articles. I really recommend that you go to their website. Another interesting article, of course, you need to publish so many interesting articles, but in 1986, Stevenson published an article comparing the features of cases of reincarnation type across cultures. And interestingly, he had studied many cases among the Igbo in Nigeria, and the article is called "Characteristics of Cases of the Reincarnation Type Among the Igbo of Nigeria." And then he compared the features of cases there with cases he studied among the Haida, the Tlingit, the Druze of Lebanon, the Levi of Turkey, in India, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Burma, and on the features of the frequency of male versus female subjects. A subject in these terms means a child who is speaking of a previous life. The incidence of same family cases, the incidence of sex change where a child speaks about being remembers being someone who was in the other gender in a previous life. So, for example, you would have a boy remembering being a woman, or a little girl remembering having been a man. We'll come back to that later. The interval, or the months between the time when the previous personality died and the child was born, the median age at death of the previous personality. These are all very, very interesting features of cases, and an interesting article. Then Stevenson went on to write 5 other very significant books. In 1984, he wrote New Studies in Xenoglossacy, which is an unlearned language. The book covers cases where someone, it's particularly someone who, under hypnotic regression, goes to a previous life and is remembering being someone who spoke a different language and actually has the ability to speak the language. We'll come back to this several more times in my talk today. Then in 1997, Ian published Reincarnation in Biology, a contribution to the etiology of birthmarks and birth defects. These are 2 volumes. Volume 1 is on birthmarks, and volume 2 is on birth defects. And these are thick volumes. I should have, the bookshelf is out of reach where they're sitting at this very moment. I should have brought them so I could hold them up and show you how fat they are. Those 2 volumes together are 2,080 pages, and very, very, very thorough studies of the cases. It shows the photos of the birth defect, or in one, the birth marks on the child, and then Stevenson often has found the autopsies or photos of the deformation on the previous personality, and so you can see the correspondence between the 2. And it's such a, these 2 volumes are so thick that he also, in the same year, 1997, produced a very condensed version called Where Reincarnation and Biology Intersect. Ian called these, particularly the 2 volumes, Reincarnation and Biology, his magnum opus, and he was really hoping that presenting this very thorough and documented evidence would have an impact on the medical profession, because people in medicine look at birth defects after all, but are in countries unused to reincarnation, not used to thinking in terms of a possible past life origin. And these books also contain what the child said and how it corresponded to the life of the previous person, et cetera, et cetera. It's not only the birthmarks and birth defects, but the evidence for the cases as well. His final volume book was in 2003, reincarnation cases in Europe. I thought I had it right here so I could hold it up because it has a lovely picture on the front, but somehow it's moved away from me. And Ian was very interested in bringing out this book because he wanted to show that even though reincarnation is not generally believed or accepted in Christian countries, Europe and North and South America, where the settler societies are Christian, there are cases that occur in these countries. Ian had already studied cases in the U.S., but he wanted to bring out about the volume of cases that he had found in Europe in 2003. It's important to note the Second Council it's sometimes referred to as the Second Council of Nicaea or a Second Council of Constantinople, but it was in 557 A.D. It decreed reincarnation anathema, meaning if you believed in reincarnation, you were excommunicated from the Catholic Church. And as a result of that decree, people began speaking about reincarnation much less often. It's really interesting history to look at. It seems that part of the motivation was that they thought that if people thought they only had one kick at the can, they would work harder to be good than if they thought they would be coming back lifetime after lifetime. But the significance of the banning of reincarnation belief in Christianity means that a lot of people in Christian countries have not thought of or never heard of reincarnation as an explanation for behavior or qualities or anything like that. And so this was part of the reason that Ian Stevenson wanted to bring out these studies of cases to show their validity in the Christian world, where reincarnation is usually not taken seriously either by the general public or by the medical profession and in psychiatry. Stevenson also wrote, of course, very many profound articles. He wrote very, very beautifully and articulately. He was an excellent writer. His first article was, before the division of parapsychology, then personality studies and perceptual studies was formed. In 1960, he brought out the evidence for survival from claimed memories of former incarnations. It was, his first article where he was really articulating that there was evidence for reincarnation. And then in 1974, some questions related to cases of the reincarnation type, another significant article, of course they all are. In 1976, a preliminary report of a new case of responsive phenoglossy, and I mentioned his volume on phenoglossy in 83, but the case of Gitxsan is an interesting case where a woman was hypnotized, a woman in the U.S., in the southern U.S., was hypnotized by her husband, who was actually a minister, a Christian minister, and under hypnosis, she recalled her life as Gitxsan in Germany, said a lot of things about that life, and spoke in German. This German was not a language that she knew or spoke in her current life. So it was quite quite interesting that under the influence of hypnosis, she recalled the many features of this case, which is, in fact, some of them can be shown or shown by Stevenson to be accurate for the town she talked about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Though it's not exactly a solved case in that they never found a record of Gretchen's existence. We'll go back to Xenagati yet again. Then, and he wrote an article in 77, The Explanatory Value of the Idea of Reincarnation. I'll explain that a little bit more further on. In that same year, the Southeast Asian Interpretation of Gender Dysphoria, an Illustrative Case report. Gender dysphoria means not liking the gender that you're in, and the particular article, the Southeast Asian interpretation of a particular case, was of a girl in Burma who recalled being a Japanese fighter pilot in World War II who was shot down and died there in Burma, and was this little girl remembered being shot down and being that Japanese fighter pilot, but she came back in a female body, and she was not content with that whatsoever. The case was studied when she was little, and Ian studied it as she grew older, and she was not happy with being female, identified herself really as male, and later had a female partner. So it was interesting that Stevenson was proposing that sometimes this cross-sex reincarnation causes this kind of gender dysphoria, and he was proposing that it can be an explanation for that phenomenon in people who do not recall a previous life, but are not happy entirely, with their gender and choose same-sex partners in their lives. Ian also wanted to have his studies augmented by having others make independent studies, and in 1987 he invited Erlander Haraldson, Jørgen Kyle, and myself to conduct studies of reincarnation cases using his methods. And I'll talk about what we did. Later on, in 1999, the book Old Souls came out. Tom Schroeder, who is a very, very well-spoken, well-written journalist, approached Ian and wanted to go with him when Ian was doing his study so that he could write a book for the general public, because most of the books and articles that Stevenson has written are aimed at medical, psychiatric, or parapsychological audience, and were not aimed at reaching necessarily the general public. So Tom Schroeder approached Ian about going with him, and did, and brought out a lovely book, Old Souls: The Scientific Evidence for Past Lives, which does a beautiful job of describing how Ian studied cases, and many features of all of this kind of work for the general public, so it could reach a much broader audience. And then later on, Ian Stevenson hired child psychiatrist Jim D. Tucker to join the division of now perceptual studies, so that he could continue the study of the cases of the reincarnation type. Which is very fortunate. So, but we go back to the people who Ian wanted to do studies. He called them replication studies to see whether people who had not done studies from cases in using his methods would find similar kinds of results to what he himself had found. And Erlendur Haraldsson is a prominent and active, now retired psychologist from Iceland. He actually had past life memories as a child, so it was a topic that he was not adverse to looking into. And he went at Stevenson's invitation and studied cases of the reincarnation type in Sri Lanka and subsequently in Lebanon. And later on, he developed psychological testing of children who remember previous life and shows that they are intelligent, not more suggestible than controls, but do score higher on dissociative checklist. I also did some psychological testing and found basically similar things in India. And since he had gone on to do many studies in Lebanon, Erlendur found that in Lebanon, some of the court children have mild post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, related to the violent cause of death in the previous life. So that when they're young, they have these vivid memories of being killed and shot in these violent kinds of ways, and it has some PTSD ramifications. He found that those aspects diminished as the child grew older, and after the memories fade, the PTSD does as well. And he has done extensive research in other aspects of parapsychology and is one of your instructors on apparitions of the deceased person. So you'll get to hear from him himself. I recommend it highly. Jürgen Keils, a psychologist who was originally from Germany, who went on to a university in Tasmania. And at Ian Stevenson's invitation, he studied court cases in Thailand and Burma, and wrote about them. And then subsequently, when Jim Tucker, the child psychiatrist, was hired by Ian, he invited Jim Tucker to go and co-study cases there. And so they've co-authored a number of articles, including how to improve the study of and documentation of cases with reincarnation type, a reappraisal of the case of Kemal Atasoy, and experimental birthmarks, new cases of an Asian practice. Experimental birthmarks take place particularly both among the Igbo in Nigeria, but also in Burma and Thailand, so that often when a person, elderly or whatever, passes on, the family will take soot and then put it on the back of the neck of the person, making a mark that is not deep, but it's colorful. And because they anticipate that when that person comes back, the mark will show. And it's interesting that just making those marks, when the person is just recently deceased, there are lots of cases where a child is born with such a mark and remembers being the person on whom the mark was put in a particular place. I want to tell you about how I got invited by Ian Stevenson. I met Stevenson in 1984 when he came to BC. He was studying Gitxsan cases of reincarnation, and he was looking for someone to continue his research in the area. And I had been introduced, this is me here, I saw Nancy's arrow pointing to me too. I had been introduced to reincarnation by the Beaver or Daneza people who are here in Canada. And this is British Columbia. So, but this is they are found in both Alberta and BC. But I went to study them just after completing my undergrad and going on to my PhD at Harvard. And so I had not expected to find reincarnation as part of their worldview. And none of the courses that I'd taken as an undergrad or a grad student at Harvard on North American Indian spirituality had said anything about that. I would find that a new baby would be born and people would talk about who it was come back. They had a very, very deep belief in reincarnation, and I was very impressed that they'd had a series of living prophets, and this is Charlie Yahe, the last Beaver Indian prophet, holding my oldest child when he is about 18 months old or whatever. And so my PhD was in anthropology and child development, and when I first went there, I was expecting to write about child development, but in fact, I found the Beaver Indian prophet dance movement so interesting that I wrote about it, and the philosophical underpinnings that behind it, and noted that that reincarnation was a strong part. And since I had not known to expect that, it came as kind of a surprise, I did a search in the 10 quote-unquote culture areas of North America to see whether they also had the tenets of the Beaver Indian spirituality. And regarding the question of reincarnation, I found that the 10 cultures in those different areas, I chose the one that had the best literature on their spiritual belief. There was some mention of reincarnation in all of them. Especially, they all definitely mentioned that the need to take the life of animals so they will want to come back and feed you again. And in some of them, they mention human reincarnation, but in others less often. And so that when Stevenson came to UBC looking for someone to continue his research into cases of reincarnation type, he was given my name and I was given his, and we met, and that was the first time I became aware of his research. I was ignorant of it before. And I agreed to use his very careful, systematic method of studying in cases to study cases among the Beaver and the Gitxsan Indigenous peoples in British Columbia. As I had been with the Beaver Indians for a long time and knew about their reincarnation research, but I was going and was planning to go and do a different piece of work that summer, but gladly accepted the invitation to use his studies both with the Beaver and then the Gitxsan as well. And this is, the Beaver we've seen before. This is the Gitxsan. They're here in British Columbia. And whereas the Beaver Indians are way up here, they are living in different parts of BC. Purple slide. I didn't know this one was purple. it was really fascinating to go back to the Beaver Indians, I knew well. But when I began asking about reincarnation cases among them, they told me about a lot of examples of people who I had known previously who had passed on and come back, been reincarnated, including the late Sam St. Pierre. He and his wife had adopted me and my husband way back in 1964, and he had since died in about 84, 20 years after I met him, and no, I'm sorry, I meant to say 74, 10 years after I met him. It was 10 years after that I found that he had come back. The comeback of Sam St. Pierre was a little boy who was only 18 months old in 1984, and he climbed up on my lap, and his mother said, "Look, he recognizes you. He's just like Grandpa. Sam St. Pierre. He's an introvert. He's shy. He would never go and sit on the lap of somebody he doesn't know." And this was the first time that I was meeting this little boy, and so I felt really, really honored to have the comeback of my greatly admired Beaver Indian father recognized me that kind of way. Though I didn't, because that was the only piece, I didn't include that in the article that I wrote that compared the cases among the Beaver and the Gitxsan that came out in 1988. The Gitxsan people I was meeting for the very first time, and they have a bigger population than the Beaver. They're salmon people. But in 1 week, I was impressed that they told me about 25 impressive examples of elders come back, and I've described them in that article as well. And frankly, it was as a result of doing that reincarnation research with the Gitxsan that at the Gitxsan and Witsuwit'en Tribal Council at that time, they were conjoined, asked me to work for them for the Delgamuukw Land Claims Court case from 1985 and 1988, and I accepted their invitation to do so. And after I'd accepted that, I learned that I got the social science, the SHRC, Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada postdoc to study reincarnation among the Gitxsan and Witsuwit'en. It was really, really interesting. I'd actually written the application for the postdoc to do the study with the Gitxsan and the Beaver Indians. But since I've been hired by the Witsuwit'en, I asked SHRC if I could change it to the Gitxsan and the Witsuwit'en, and they agreed, and of course the Gitxsan and the Witsuwit'en agreed too. And then while I was in that whole process of doing those studies, Ian Stevenson asked me to do the replication court in India. So you can see there's the backdrop to my going off to India to do like Erlander Haraldson and Jürgen Kyle a replication study. And when he asked me if I would be willing to go to India and do a replication study, I definitely agreed. I'd never been to India. I thought it was fascinating. And then he hired me to work at ADOPT's division of it was then called Personality Studies from 1988 to 1994. And I got the opportunity to go back and study a lot more cases in India and to continue the study of cases with the Gitxsan and the Witsuwit'en. And I've continued that ever since. So I particularly studied cases of reincarnation type with two different kinds of Indians, the North American Indians, and this is Sam St. Pierre and his wife Jean, and that's my first child, Abali, when he's little, and in India, and it's really been wonderful that I've gotten to go back and do longitudinal studies as well. This young man has his face painted for his wedding, but when he was a very small child, I had first documented his case, and it's fascinating, fascinating case. I don't know that I have a lot of time. You can ask me more questions about that if you like, but interestingly, he was still in love with his wife from the previous life and was very unhappy about the prospect of having to marry somebody else. And I brought out a book called Amerindian Rebirth, Reincarnation Belief Among North American Indians and Inuit. It's an anthology with chapters by my numbers of different people include, and 2 chapters by myself, but interesting chapters, for example, of in an Inuit, one Inuit community, the people, it's quite fairly frequent that people come back the opposite gender, this may not be the appropriate word, the other gender, and those people are particularly likely to become the shamans. And, a little girl who remembers being a man is particularly likely to marry someone who, as a little boy, remembered the life of a woman. It's a very interesting way that they articulate all of that. And now that I've given you so much background on reincarnation in my experience, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about the background of how Ian got into looking at reincarnation as a profound experience that impacts people's personality and being. When he was a child, growing up, he read his mother's books on all topics, but his mother had a lot of books on theosophy, a kind of new spiritual belief that included a belief in reincarnation. So he definitely had been introduced to the concept of reincarnation, unlike most of people in North America and Europe who grow up without being aware that it's a context that or something that may happen. And he had all the more time to read because from birth he had this bronchial condition of his throat, and it meant that he, unlike his elder brother who also became a psychiatrist, couldn't play sports. So he was at that point in his life, and which I may well have added to his interest in medicine, but meant that he spent a lot of time reading. And it's also interesting that later on in his career, after he became chair of psychiatry at UVA, he'd done work on psychosomatic medicine, done all kinds of interesting studies. But he also did research on LSD when he was chair of psychiatry at UVA, fairly early on. And it's interesting that Emily Kelly has included information about that and lists all the articles that he wrote on that topic. Very, very interesting. In his book Science, the Self, and Survival After Death. Frankly, when I met him, I read all of this that he'd written on reincarnation, but was less aware of his other things. But he did mention, in an article that he wrote toward the end of his life, that he had a past life experience under LSD influence, fairly early on in the 60s, 70s. But he never ever spoke about what he saw, about what his past life contained. He never spoke about that at all. I'd love to know, but he didn't share that with anyone ever. But it was another thing that impacted him going on to look at reincarnation, and then so that it became the focus of his research. It became the focus of the rest of the great deal of his life. So, I studied other aspects of parapsychology as well. Then he hired Jim Tucker, who's shown here, who's a child psychiatrist, and Jim Tucker is still at the DOPS, Division of Perceptual Studies, as it's called now, and continues on the studies of reincarnation very rapidly. He is particularly, I'll talk first of all about a study that he did that came out in 2000. It was very good that Tucker developed a scale to measure the strength of children's claims of previous lives, and it notes that there are different kinds of features. If it's a solved case, of course, it's stronger than if no one's ever found who matches what the child is saying about the previous life. It's stronger if it's not a same family case, and if the person was not known to the child's family, et cetera, and if there's a written record, et cetera. It's good to have this way of assessing the strength of cases. And he's written two important books, Life Before Life, and I was just going to show it, and then I found that here's the European cases of reincarnation type that I wanted to show you, that Ian, his last volume. It's interesting that it's got a more interesting cover to sort of entice the general public to read it. But going back to Jim Tucker, he wrote Life Before Life, and now my copy of that is eluding me. Oh, here it is. Life Before Life, a scientific investigation of children's memories of previous lives, in 2005. And this book has been translated into lots of languages. And then he's also written the book Return to Life, Extraordinary Cases of Children Who Remember Previous Lives, in 2013. And it includes the cases in the U.S., particularly the well-known now case of James Leninger, and also the case of Brian. And these books are oriented to a general public. They're not just for the psychiatric profession. They're written to bring awareness about these kinds of cases to the general public, which is also useful. He's also co-author of an article on the psychological evaluation of American children who report memories of previous lives with Don Nidifer. And so, he's doing this kind of close psychological study, but also making the studies more accessible to a general public. I didn't mention earlier that Ian Stevenson's first 5 volumes on reincarnation, the 20 cases and the 4 volumes were all published by the University of Virginia. At that time, the chief publisher for that journal, was very happy to publish Ian's work in that domain. When that person retired, Ian found that the person who took over retained that kind of general reluctance to think in terms of reincarnation, and so Ian had to find other publishers. So these also have found publishers that are not UVA press, definitely, but people who reach people who want to learn more about reincarnation. And there have been a number of studies of cases with a written record of what the child said before the case was solved. And in terms of Jim Tucker's scale to measure the strength of case, such cases, of course, score higher, because if what the child, everything that the child said and the way they acted and all those kinds of things are written down before you find out that such a person existed, you know that nothing is added after the two families meet. And there are now 35 cases with written record of what the child said before the previous person was found. And Harrelson has described, this case in 1991, Kyle and Tucker in 2005. I've described one in 2004. Stevenson and Summerot in 1988. And these are significantly significant in that the skeptics are less likely to be able to just say, oh, well, the family just told them about the person, and therefore that's why they're saying all that they say. This Tucker and Kyle case that they described in 2005 is an interesting one. There was a written record made before the deceased individual, the previous personality, was identified, and it shows that the numerous statements made by a Turkish boy about a previous life were accurate for the life of a man who lived 500 miles away and died 50 years before the child was born. So, the chances of the child or his family knowing anything about that previous personality are extremely diminished. But I got to study such a case, and in 2004, and in India, the child talked about his previous life in a town that turned out to be 75 kilometers away, not so far, but it was a town his parents had never even heard of. They didn't know it existed, and it was fascinating to study that case. But it was very interesting that Witsuwit'en and Stevenson in 1998 compared a set of cases with written records made before the previous personality was identified with cases without such records. And they found that the cases with records documenting what the child had said actually averaged more past life statements than the others. So that indicates that it doesn't seem that there's a lot of false attribution of statements after the meeting with the previous personality family. Because if that happened, you would think that there would be a higher number of statements in the cases where the families had already met when there was a documentation was made of what the child said. So, interesting study. Now I'm going to give you an example of a case. This is a case that I've studied among the Gitxsan in British Columbia, Canada. And it's the same family case where Mark Peters Sr., this gentleman here, his wife, is said to have come back as his great-grandson, Nathan. The family requested that we use altered names because they didn't want people to come and knock on their door about the case, so these are made-up names. It's a case that has many features. there's an announcing dream, a birthmark, precocity in the child, recognitions, and special knowledge. And about the announcing dream. Announcing dreams obviously occur much more often in same family cases, because if somebody dreams about somebody coming back or saying they're going to come back, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and you don't even recognize the person, you wouldn't necessarily associate that with reincarnation whatsoever. But so it's actually one of the features that is in Jim Tucker's strength of scale assessment. And the dream in this case, Nathan's grandfather, Mark Peters Jr., dreamed after his dad had passed away that his dad came to him and said in the dream, "I'll stay with you guys by Raven." Now Raven is Mark Peters Jr.'s daughter, Nathan's mom. And when he had the dream, it was before Raven knew she was pregnant, and but then she became pregnant, and Mark Peters understood or had the family then had some kind of expectation, obviously, that Mark Peters Sr. was coming back as this baby because of the announcing dream. So it's actually it's given some strength in the strength of scale case, but you can see also how this expectation, skeptics would say, oh well, they're just expecting that person to come back, and therefore they're attributing qualities of that person to the child. So anyway, take a look at this case. When Nathan was a baby, from the time he was a baby, he pointed out the birthmark. It shows up more darkly in some other pictures. Over and over and over and over again, he would point to his chest over and over and over again. And when we arrived, the first time I met him, he was already 4 years old, and we came in, and he pulled off his T-shirt and began pointing to the birthmark without saying a word, just as he had as a child. Isn't that interesting? And the birthmark, you can see a little bit better here. I think it shows up in some other pictures as well. Was noticed at birth. When he was born, I said, "Oh wow, look at that birthmark," and it was significant because it relates to a near fatal wound on the chest of Nathan's great grandfather, Mark Peters Sr. That he received from falling off a railway car that he was loading. He was way up high on top of the railway car, loading cedar poles into it, when along came a boom and knocked him off the railway car, and he fell down onto the ground on his stomach and didn't move. Everyone, they thought he was dead. He was not moving whatsoever. Mark Peters Sr.'s son was 13 years old at the time, and he was there. He witnessed, the accident, and it was traumatic. Obviously, they turned him over and saw the puncture in his chest, and he was taken to the hospital and survived. He survived. That was not when he died. He survived, but it was a major accident that he received, and that's it's interesting that there's a birthmark that relates to that wound on Nathan. Besides the birthmark and the announcing dream, Nathan was precocious in a number of ways, and he made a lot of recognitions, and I want to talk about, you have the fishing sites, smokehouses, helicopters. Nathan was only about 20, I think he was 28 months old when he went for the first time to the traditional fishing site of his great-grandfather in the Gitxsan or matrilineal society. So his grandfather is in a different house than his great-grandfather and would have a different traditional fishing site. But he went with his grandfather and his great-grandmother, the widow of Peters Sr., when he was very young, to the traditional fishing site, and it was people were just amazed. He had complete recognition of where he was. They were going to go fishing for salmon. Salmon is a huge part of their diet and life. But he began directing everything like he was the head chief. He began pointing out, this is where you go, the current over there, you have to avoid these kinds of backlash currents, and he began just telling them exactly what they had to do, and just taking over. He saw the old smokehouse, and he was really disappointed that it looked like it was in disrepair. And then he saw a pair of boots, and he said, "What are my boots doing? They're looking so old and grungy." All covered with dust. And those were the boots of his great-grandfather, his fishing boots, that he was recognizing. He also had recognition of helicopters. The first time that he saw a helicopter when he was quite young, he said, "I've been on one of those." And Nathan had definitely not been in a helicopter, but his great-grandfather had gone up in the helicopter in order to document the significant boundaries of the Gitxsan traditional territories for the Delgamuukw land claims court case. So it was an important part of the work that his great-grandfather had done. He'd definitely been in a helicopter. And it was interesting that just shortly before we arrived to study the case, Nathan had begun instructing his grandfather about how to survive a bear attack. And here he is giving the lesson on how you survive a bear attack. It was interesting because his grandfather didn't need to know about this information. His head chief's name means half bear, half human that doesn't hibernate. And obviously Mark Jr. was taught by his father also about bears and everything, and his father was head chief of his house. But Nathan was intent on teaching and protecting his grandfather as if he was his son, and he said to him, wanted to teach him because he wanted him to be safe. And his grandfather said, I'm going in the car. And Nathan said, well, you remember a couple of weeks ago you went out in the car and you had a flat tire and you got out to change it? In that time a bear could have come. So this is what you do. If a bear comes, you put the pack behind your back, you look really fierce, and you confront the bear like that, and you do and he just went on and on and on about what he should do so that he would survive a bear attack. And in that part of Gitxsan territory, when you're driving along the highway, the chances that a bear can come when you're out changing a tire are indeed high. So it was information that he really felt that he had to give to his grandfather. He was his grandfather's teacher. And once again, you can see here the birthmark that Nathan was born with. More recently, we don't have an unlimited amount of time. I originally thought of presenting a couple of other cases of, besides this family case as an example. One of the cases that I thought of presenting, it was a case of Krishan Chand Kapoor, which is in the cases of the Reincarnation type volume 1 of 10 cases in India. It's a case where there was a written record of what the child said, and the child made 49 statements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So interesting and strong kind of case. And I also thought of telling you about a couple of cases in Jim Tucker's book, but these the case of, you can see this picture of James Leninger. But that's a well-known case, and Nancy said that they would make available online the YouTubes of Jim Tucker talking about cases he studied that include that case. So I'm just going to go to some recent reviews of cases of reincarnation type that Jim Tucker and I have written. The very most recent one is in 2015, Reincarnation Field Studies and Theoretical Issues Today. And it was an invited chapter in Parapsychology, a handbook of the 21st century, published by these people. And I was asked to write the chapter, and I asked if Jim Tucker could be co-author, and they said sure. It was fascinating that the first edition of the handbook of the Parapsychology handbook, the chapter on reincarnation was written by Ian Stevenson. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful chapter. And he called it Reincarnation, Field Studies and Theoretical Issues, and without the word today. We also wrote earlier, it came out a year earlier, the chapter Past Life Experiences that appeared in the volume of Varieties of Anomalous Experience, the Scientific Evidence, which is a play on varieties of religious experience by William James. That was published by the American Psychological Association. It's wonderful that Kaidenia, Lynn, and Krippner got the American Psychological Association to their press to publish a book of that nature. The first volume of that, the book on the chapter on past life experiences was written by me, and Lynn was the person to review it, and he had some skeptical issues, et cetera, and transformed it so what I wrote so much that I asked him to become the second author, so that it would sort of explain the changed tone of the article. Interesting stuff. But I also want to point out before we come to your questions, that, well, we don't have much time for questions, but we can still take it, that Stevenson noted that past life regression through hypnosis is not necessarily a valid way to learn about past lives. In 1977, he wrote an article that said the subject under hypnosis is in a condition of increased suggestibility, and he usually feels a strong inclination to conform to the wishes of the hypnotist. And, Lynn was particularly aware, of articles that were done by psychologists where they, the psychologists hypnotized university students and gave them suggestions about what they would find in their past life, and sure enough, that's what they came up with. Stevenson also noted that under hypnosis, a lot of the information that they say is coming from past life, may be coming from books, movies, radio, and TV programs that the person has seen, and they're thinking that it's coming from a past life, but in fact it's coming from things they've been exposed to in their present life. And the word for that false memory of thinking that it's from a past life when it's not is cryptomnesia. And Stevenson also wrote a 1994 article called The Psychotherapist Fallacy, Hypnotic Regression to Previous Lives. Again, saying you've got to be really careful. There are a lot of cases where somebody talks, is hypnotized and talks about a past life, and what they're saying can be demonstrated to be unfactual, impossible, not correct information for the time and place that they're talking about, et cetera, et cetera. Yet past life regression has become accepted by many therapists, starting with Brian Weiss, whose patient was working with a patient who was having a lot of trouble coming to terms with things that she had great fears of. And so under hypnosis, he asked her to go back to the source of those issues. And to his utter surprise, he didn't ask her to go back to a previous life. He didn't think in terms of reincarnation whatsoever. But when he hypnotized her and said to go to the source, she did go back to a previous life. And he found, that really, has changed the way that he thinks about where one's psychological phobias, et cetera, come from. And he has endorsed reincarnation thoroughly. Brian Weiss was a professor of psychiatry in University of Florida who, had his degree in psychiatry from Yale, highly reputed, but he has gone on to after writing his first book, Many Lives, Many Masters, to include not only past life reincarnation, but it's interesting that he's brought meditation as part of the psychotherapy that he thinks is most effective in helping people relieve people from the issues that they're dealing with. And it's interesting that in the book Old Souls that Tom Schroeder wrote for the general public, he talks about not only going to look at reincarnation cases with Ian Stevenson, but about Brian Weiss, and noting that one of the things that really impacted Brian Weiss was that patient that he was working with she not only described typical many cases of past reincarnation, not one but subsequent ones, but in between life spaces, also spoke about his own son, Brian Weiss's son, who had passed away, had an impact on Brian Weiss. But it's interesting that the Bollywood movie stars, Bollywood is the name for the movie stars in India, are now being regressed, through hypnosis to previous lives in TV series in India. That's extremely popular. But it's important to note that this may not be accurate whatsoever. There are all kinds of things that are all kinds of reasons that one should be skeptical about whether those are accurate past lives that are being produced through the work of hypnosis. But Stevenson studied cases of xenoglosy with interest, and that came through reincarnation. And I talked about the case of Gitxsan and his whole book on xenoglosy. There's a new case of xenoglosy was studied recently by Okado and Okamoto in Japan. And under hypnosis, this person spoke in a Nepalese tribal language. Now, that's quite remarkable. And Okado was trained in linguistics, and so he found it very, very, very striking that this person spoke in a language that people in Japan definitely don't speak or hear, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Okado has gone on to be very interested in reincarnation cases. He has gone to the Division of Perceptual Studies, DOPS, the current DOPS, and worked with Jim Tucker. And he's gone on to study a lot of Japanese cases of children's memories of birth, in the womb, pre-life, the sort of intermission memories, and past life memories, using a sample of 10,000 Japanese mothers, asking them if their children had those kinds of memories. And very, very fascinating articles. Memories from birth, womb, and intermission or pre-life had become known in Japan because there was an MD who wrote books about such memories of children some time ago. And so the general public was aware of them. And now they've added the past life memories, and it's fascinating material. There, in this sample of 10,000 cases, they look at the features of all these different types, and there were 96 past life memories, and so they look at whether there was any of the features in these types of memories that can be shown to be accurate, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's interesting that the pre-life is particularly being out of body, and the circumstance of saying, I chose you, I saw you, I chose you to be my parents, is from that intermission kind of state. And that's also a feature of the James Leninger case that's quite famous and also described by Jim Tucker. And I'm going to end by talking about some recent studies. It's interesting that Harvard psychologists did a study to look at false memory in Americans with past life experience, and their paper by Myersberg, Gallo, and McNally in 2009 looked at whether there was false memory propensity was higher in people reporting recovered memories of past lives compared to a control sample who didn't have any memories of past lives. And they had an interest in looking at that, in large part because McNally, a psychologist at Harvard who's been doing studies for a long time about memory, had done a study in 1998 of adults who had suffered from sexual abuse, forgetting the trauma cues that had in their past life, their experience, not past life, their sexual abuse in this life. McNally has done a lot of work to show that sometimes adults who go to court to accuse someone of sexually molesting them as a child are not accurately presenting what happened. The post-traumatic stress of being sexually abused, repeatedly can actually result in messing up memory. But they didn't find that the false memory explained the results in the Americans with past life experiences. And so then they went on to do a study of Myers-Briggs and McNally of Americans with past life experiences, and to see compared to people who didn't have such experiences, and looked at whether it reduced death distress and gave an enhanced meaning to life. And they showed that it does. It reduced that the people in their sample who had past life memory had less death distress and had an enhanced sense of meaning of life. Very, very interesting kind of change from where they began. So you see that Western psychology is slowly finding that there's something meaningful to cases of the reincarnation type. So it's interesting that there's the sample that they used in both the 2009 study and in the 2011 study is a mixture of people who had past life regression, which may or may not be accurate, and people who reported past lives from a variety of other things such as deja vu experiences, et cetera, et cetera. And, I want to go back to this, an earlier article on the explanatory value of reincarnation, because Stevenson noted way back then that many people have deja vu experiences. I've been here before. Or phobias for no reason. Somebody can have an intense fear of drowning or of being shot by a particular kind of really long gun or some. And philias, instantaneous likes or dislikes of meeting of people the first time you meet them. I think everybody's had that kind of experience. And Ian Stevenson pointed out that those kinds of experiences, the deja vu, the phobias, the philias, etc., can be explained in human experience. These kinds of experiences that everybody has, even though most people don't remember a previous life. Even in northern India, where cases are relatively frequent, it's only 1 in 450 people remembers a previous life. And in other parts, of the world, it's much less frequent. In southern India, where people believe in reincarnation, there's very, very, very few accounts of somebody remembering the previous life. And that may be related to the fact that there's much less violent death, and it seems that when you die unexpectedly, you're more likely to want to do a turnaround and come back than if you die at the end of your life and go on from there. So I've certainly found it fascinating to study cases of the reincarnation type, and it was wonderful to get to do a longitudinal study that included psychological testing. But just to meet this child when in the replication study who had this double birthmark of this was where a bullet entered his head, and then we got the autopsy of the previous personality. And found that this indeed the bullet that killed him entered there and exited behind his ear, and you can see that his skull is distended there, and that's where the autopsy showed the bullet had exited. And it was interesting. This is T2 when he was 18 when I did the longitudinal follow-up study. it was interesting then that he said that he experienced a gunshot wound every day. He had never mentioned that, previously, so I'm not sure whether that's accurate, but it's a fascinating case. It's very, very, very interesting topic, reincarnation. So I provided, I think, 16 pages of references. I've taken them from the Mills and Tucker 2015 article. So, on and on and on, so that you can look at these, on and on and on to see the sources and look them up, for your interest. So I'm gone over time, but I'd like to know if you'd like to have some discussion.
I lengthen the time, Antonia, so we can discuss as long as you like.
Of course, I wanted to go to something, a talk by someone that's starting at 1:00. But never mind. I can miss that. The world will not come to an end.
Not to worry, not to worry. Please, everybody, put your questions into the Q&A.
Let's see. Ariane, you're asking, have you found any credible cases of someone reporting a past life? Whoops. Wait a minute. That changed.
A past life as an animal, she's asking. Past life as an animal.
I have not heard of any such cases, but Ian Stevenson has written about such cases. Obviously, in such a situation, he's talked about cases in which someone remembered being a cobra in India and a cow in India. In such circumstances, of course, you can't go to the cobra's family and say, is this accurate, or the cow's family? But it's interesting that there are some people do report such memories, and it's very interesting that in the Northwest Coast, where I've done a lot of my reincarnation studies, people, all those clans, like the Nathan case, he belongs to a clan. He's in a different clan from his grandfather, same clan as his great grandfather, and those clans have totems that are animals, but people don't. In the Haida, they say that sometimes if you die in the ocean, you'll come back as a killer whale, but people don't want that to happen, and it's not found to happen, very often at all.
Antonia, Doug is asking, is there any merit to Walter Simke's idea of facial resemblance?
Yes, that's a feature, Doug, that Ian Stevenson has looked at, and it's a tricky topic because sometimes they're same family cases, but sometimes they are even within same families there's a variation in facial conformity. But it's also something that Ian Stevenson has looked at in terms of cases where the child is not biologically related to the previous personality at all. And it doesn't always occur, but just as, as birthmarks and birth defects occurs in reincarnation cases, whether the person is related to the previous personality or not, there are facial resemblances as well as personality resemblances between children and the previous personality in instances. You can look at what Ian has written on that topic. Have you found an average time between lives? Ariane is asking. I know you mentioned one person who, I can't read something, 50 years ago or something. Yes, there's a huge amount, and I put in my presentation some of those articles that talk about the huge amount of variation between how fast somebody comes back. It's interesting that the Jews of Lebanon and the Levi of Turkey expect reincarnation to be practically instantaneous. Like, when a person, the way they think about reincarnation, when a person dies, they see them as coming back, being born right away. In fact, it's interesting to note that the interval between the previous personality's death and the child's birth even in those cultures is longer than that. But it's not always as long as 9 months. And there's a huge amount of variation around the world in different cultures. To some extent, it's related to expectation. It's interesting that in the Tibetan context, the Tulkus, the spiritual leaders, are expected to come back quite soon, because that's part of their responsibility, is to come back and continue being the spiritual teachers and leaders that they are. So the Dalai Lama is somebody who's recognized as the comeback of the previous Dalai Lama, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's interesting that the head chiefs of the Gitxsan and Witsuwit'en, they also feel a responsibility to help mentor and lead on their people, and they come back relatively quickly, but not some variation in between the death of the previous person and coming back. Whereas there's variation, so you can look at those articles and see the variation, and there's variation, of course, in the cases within each culture, but the average time within those cultures, there's a lot of variation going on. Let's see. Eduardo is asking, the supposed reincarnated kids make of their remembrance an issue of interaction. And now I can't read the bottom of the question. Can anybody else? Oh, an issue of interaction with their imaginary friends. Is that? And what's next? What does it say after that? If the
if they have
I did a particular study of comparing children who had imaginary playmates and children who remember previous lives. It's a very interesting phenomena. For imaginary playmates, a lot of children, who have them, it's in that same time frame of, from being very, 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 very young up until, till 6, and being really, convinced that they're kind of real. In imaginary playmates, there's another time after that when the child is aware that they're not necessarily quite so real, but still enjoys playing with their imaginary playmates. And it was interesting to do a study. I think my comparative study is probably in the bibliography that's attached to this. But you could find it somehow there, I'm sure. If not, and it is interesting, and it was interesting that I did that study comparing cases in India and cases of the reincarnation type in India, particularly, and in imaginary playmates in Charlottesville, Virginia, getting my sample from preschool children. And it was interesting that one of the cases, imaginary playmates, the mother was kind of aware of Ian Stevenson's work and went on to describe the features of that the case really actually had features of a case of reincarnation, actually. Like the child saying, I have another father, you're not my father, kind of thing, which is kinds of statements that happen in reincarnation cases. And among the Witsuwit'en cases I've studied, there was one boy who had an imaginary playmate, a baby that he cuddled and took care of. And it was interesting to see that in that context, his family was convinced that was from a previous life where he had been, very attached to a baby, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, read the article if you care to.
Antonia, Scott had asked if there was any work that analyzed reincarnation narratives for their psychological functioning. And he's asking that because Robert Sardello has said that both reincarnation and resurrection are cultural imaginations of immortality. So he's wondering about the analysis of narratives themselves.
Has there been any analysis of them in terms of what? The psychological characteristics of the people who are having the cases?
No, the actual narrative itself, the reincarnation story. Has there been any of that? Do the reincarnation stories in and of themselves, even if they're not verified or verifiable, help the
child in their functioning in their life? That's an interesting question. It's an interesting question, and it's a very, very broad one. In a certain sense, I would say that Myersberg and McNally study is kind of indicating that they do help the person in the sense that they give greater meaning to life, etc. But it's not a topic that has been explicitly examined a great deal. We know that there can be post-traumatic stress kinds of things, phobias kinds of things. Those tend to be reduced after the child is past the stage of remembering the past life intensely. It's interesting that children who remember previous lives are show in general, the studies done by Haraldson, et cetera, and myself, et cetera, show that the children are, and Jim Tucker too, quite intelligent. It's remarkable that somehow they're coming back with a past life memory enhances your kind of perceptions and awareness in this world. And I think that intelligence continues on for the rest of life, unlike the memories which tend to fade. So it's interesting. It's an interesting phenomenon, but it's an area where perhaps there can be more studies to answer that question more thoroughly. So, are there instances of birthmarks due to organ donation of the previous personality? Whoa, now that's an interesting question. Whether someone who has given an organ to be put into somebody else after they pass away, whether they come back and there's a birthmark showing that some organ of theirs had been taken out. I'm not aware of any studies on that topic to this point in time. So, Jules, you've asked, now wait a minute. Could be cell memory rather than reincarnation. Are you speaking, is that all, or Ali, Chester?
Antonia?
Yes?
Antonia, Jules' question was, are there oddball, perhaps in the discard pile, of strong that never existed, events that happened, not, and yet the people recall those lives? And are there cases that recall future lives? Are they pushed out of the database because they're unusual, or have people dealt with these?
I'm not aware of children speaking about future lives. That's not something that Stevenson or Tucker or I have come across so far. there was a little bit of strangeness in the voice quality, so I'm not sure I caught all of the question. Can you repeat a question that I may have missed, Nancy? It says Ali.
Jules' primary question was, are there cases that get dropped because there are elements in the narrative that don't fit the model?
No. One of the points of doing a scientific assessment of reincarnation is to look, to keep the sample, to assess the qualities of the full sample. There have been a large number of cases studied, and 2,500 cases of reincarnation, sit in the electronic files as well as the paper files at the Division of Perceptual Studies. But in fact, in doing assessments of cases, sometimes different people choose to use the stronger cases rather than including also the cases that are weak. Does that answer the question? And I'm not sure if Nancy, Witsuwit'en, I think that's happened in the past with OPE cases, but out-of-body experience, but I'm not sure what you're answering there.
That in the out-of-body literature, there has been early literature, there has been a tendency to drop cases that are unusual and to build theory on the basis of cases that only fit a particular model. So that's why I was saying it's great Stevenson's case materials are all available.
Yes, that's part of the quality of doing a scientific study.
Ali was asking, could it be cell memory rather than reincarnation?
Cell memory meaning what? How is the cell remembering what's happened to somebody else? I'm not sure. Pardon?
Very good question. Doug is asking, do children remember recent previous personalities speak in this life sooner than other children?
Well, it's interesting. It seems that the time between death and coming back, if a person stays in some discarnate world for a long time, it doesn't seem to necessarily diminish memories a huge amount. But that's something, you can look at the literature on that and the variation in the time between dying and coming back. It seems that a lot, well, in fact, it's noteworthy that in a lot of the cases of reincarnation, a child is talking about coming back relatively quickly, but on top of that is the issue of that the length of time when a person dies violently or unexpectedly, they seem to be more likely to come back quickly because they haven't finished their business in the previous life, so that they're really concerned about their wife and children, or their for a girl for her husband and children, and their work isn't done, so that seems to be a feature of bringing them back quickly. Let's see. Did Dr. Stevenson ever tell you what his past life memories were during? No. He never told anyone about what his past life memory was at all. Not a single person is aware. Not Emily, Kelly, not anyone. He never divulged that. He chose to keep that private. So no, we don't know what that was. Who he was. I'm sure that whoever he was in the past was somebody who was highly intelligent like him and very articulate, but who it was, he didn't mention. So, now I'm seeing one, is that coming back, or is it possible that passing spirit influences the memory of, and now I can't read the bottom line. I'm sorry, maybe you can help me see what.
Yeah, there's one I want to ask you first from Maurice. He wanted to know, do anthropologists accept cases of reincarnation more often?
Not necessarily. Interestingly, my husband never heard what the Beaver Indians were saying about reincarnation, and he's kind of thinks that some of what my interest in it is kind of bogus, but I find that fascinating. But I think it's in part because when a new baby would be born, I would be the one. I love babies. And I would go and see the baby, and that's when people would be talking about who it was, come back, et cetera, et cetera. Very strangely, my second baby was less than 2 years old when a Beaver Indian, elderly Beaver Indian medicine man recognized her as being his wife who died in the 1918 flu epidemic that killed everybody in the whole Prophet River community except him. But my husband wasn't present when that medicine man, Jumbie, about who my husband wrote a book called Little Bit Know Something, when he said that. And so it's interesting. Some people, I think you need to have some kind of the possibility of listening to what people say. It was interesting, actually. I was so surprised to learn about reincarnation among the Beaver Indians that I wrote to my parents, my mom and dad, and said, what do you think about reincarnation? And it was interesting that they wrote back, and my mom, who had a sense of humor, wrote back saying the Protestant work ethic was her religion. She was teasing, of course, and she never thought about reincarnation. And my dad wrote back and said that when he was in university, he went to Yale, he'd read the Bhagavad Gita, and he had concluded that if there is life after death, there must be life before birth. And when I got that letter from him, I saw that as a kind of the green light to listen to what the Beaver Indians had to say about reincarnation. Isn't that interesting? And at the time, here I was, a young adult. I wasn't even aware that my father's specialty. He founded the program in American Studies at the University of Iowa. Was in the Transcendentalists, Emerson and Thoreau, who had been influenced by reading the translation that had finally come into English of the Bhagavad Gita, so that they included it in their philosophy as well. So it's interesting, isn't it? Perhaps I needed that.
Very interesting, Antonia. Chris was asking, how do we know that reincarnation is the explanation? Could it be a passing spirit who comes into contact with a baby and dumps some memories, gives them some memories?
And then that spirit moves on? The reason that we think it's not just a dumping in is that the children who speak this kind of way do it during that period of from being very young until 6. How I don't know if somebody can dump something into a child, and would it create the birthmarks? I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question, but it's a very interesting question, and I should point tell you that I'm slow in finishing the book that I'm working on called that's my chair, Rebirth Experience of the Gitxsan and Witsuwit'en, because I'm trying to understand more deeply the occasional Gitxsan experiences of some person going on, to the nether realm, to a spirit world, reincarnating simultaneously multiple times, and also appearing to their relatives when they're in a state of crisis as the grandmother that she was to them, when they're in the emergency ward in the hospital, or have had, one woman had a medical condition. She fell off her second-story balcony, and then was in a difficult position, and had the experience of her grandmother coming and saying, "You're going to be fine. You're going to be fine." That's what the grandmother was saying in both of those particular cases. It's interesting, and it's not easy to plumb the depth of all these different kinds of things. It's very interesting that all of some people say 7 language families in North America, all of Indigenous peoples, all have 3, where are my fingers so I can put them on the screen, 3 different words for aspects of soul. In English, we tend to see soul as being sort of like one thing, but in all the Indigenous languages, they see it as having these different components, and it seems like that there's a piece that stays in the spirit world. Then in most instances people don't choose to come back multiply, but this one Gitxsan woman who she was a grandmother when I went there back in 1984, and she said that she wanted to come back. She wanted to come back 12 times, and she has. Apparently, that's a tricky chapter in that book that I'm still working on. I don't know if that helps answer any of your questions. Let's see. Do you accept graduate students interested in studying reincarnation in your anthro department? I actually taught it after my time at the Division of Personality Studies, or DOPS, in the First Nation Studies or Indigenous Studies program at UNBC. And yes, we definitely accept people who want to do studies of reincarnation, there, particularly for Indigenous peoples. That's Indigenous peoples rather than reincarnation in general. It would be interesting. I'm sure that people could do that in India and in other parts of the world where reincarnation happens as well. Not only in anthropology, of course, but perhaps other in psychology, in other fields as well. But perhaps anthropology would be more open to it than psychology. I'm not sure the answer to that question. Anything else? Or have we reached the end of your questions? I sure haven't reached the end of my questions on reincarnation, I can tell you. It's a profound topic, and I really enjoy continuing to get to study these cases. Let's see. I would love my this life parents to take me seriously and contact a scientist about what?
Raya was telling us, Antonia, that she had reincarnation memories and had difficulty bonding with her mother in this life because of her memory of her mother from the previous life, and that was some years back, and her parents did not believe her. That's why she's saying that. Carlos was asking if children who remember previous lives also have more
of the other types of psychic experiences, like ESP, OBEs, and healing abilities?
Now, that's an interesting question. That's a very interesting question, and I'm not sure of the answer to that question. There are I already described the people who are the shamans among some of the Inuit people who remember a life as in the opposite gender, and those people are particularly likely to be shamans. But I think that there are in cultures that accept those kinds of experiences. Not all have past life memories, but that there are a lot of cultures where such experiences are more readily acceptable than in the kind of scientifically oriented, North American world today. Reincarnation cases, are more common in Indigenous societies that accept those other kinds of experiences. But not everyone remembers a previous life. For example, among the Witsuwit'en, people with whom I've been doing work for a long time, one little girl did a healing on her grandmother when she was, young, and her grandmother is sure that her ability to do that healing came from a previous life, but it still did, nobody knew who she had been, what healer she had been in her previous life. So there's a recognition of abilities coming from previous lives. Particularly, when children have those abilities when they're young. And it was one of the things that struck me among the Beaver Indians that first summer when we arrived in 1964, there was a very elderly medicine man who had a heart attack, and we were asked to take him 70 miles to the hospital, and we did. He didn't want to stay there. Came back after a few weeks, had another heart attack, and his 7-year-old daughter, because that elderly gentleman in his 90s, his youngest wife, his current wife was young. They had a 7-year-old daughter, and she did a very impressive healing ceremony on him after his second heart attack. I was amazed at her ability to do that, and asked Sam and Jean, who adopted me, how she knew to do that, and they said from who she was in the previous life.
Antonia, Ariane was asking, has anyone ever remembered a past life on another planet?
I would imagine that's happened, but I haven't seen reports of that. I think that those experiences wouldn't necessarily come to the division of perceptual studies readily. So I'm not aware of such cases, though they can well happen.
Well, Antonia, I think the questions are winding down, and we're almost at the 2-hour, 20-minute mark. So I think we should probably close the class off. Can you close up? Well, first, feel free to say thank you or whatever you want to say as a final comment, and then if you would close your mic, that would be great.
Sure. Well, it's been a pleasure to present this class or whatever it is about reincarnation. I think it's a very important topic that people should be aware of, and I'm sure there'll be many further studies that will enhance our understanding. thank you all for this opportunity. Bye for now.
Thank you to all of you for coming, and thank you to Antonia for coming. This has been a fantastic presentation.
So have a great day today, you guys. Bye now.